What's up, everyone, and welcome into your Celtics source, home of your 3-4 Boston Celtics, coming off just an absolute punking, to use Peyton Pritchard's words, against the Houston Rockets last night. They fell 128 to 101, and they really were never in the game at any point. And, there are just going to be games like that this season, where they're coming off a back-to-back. You're playing a lineup that is virtually 7 feet tall at every position. And I thought the Celtics did a good job, the best job they could on the offensive glass. That was definitely a big problem. The defensive boards, both sides, just trying to guard, 7 foot tall players with 6'5" point guards, is a challenge. And I thought the Celtics did an okay job of that. It's just one of those games where you're not really going to have a chance to win the game, especially when a team is shooting, 65% or whatever it was from three, which the Rockets could not miss. And Joe Mazzulla said it after the game, right? It was just one of those games where you sort of give credit where credit is due, and you move on. But that being said, I want to, look at the silver linings, the positives from this game, because I thought there was a big, role player that stepped up in this game that we haven't seen much about or much of lately. And there's been, a little, controversy on, what's going on with him. And that is Baylor Shyman. Right? Baylor Shyman, it's just his second year. He was a late first round draft pick last season. And we're looking for him to, basically define himself as a key role player on this team. And we just haven't seen that yet. But I thought this game was the first game where we actually saw him perform to a level that we have been looking for him to perform to for quite some time now. I think there's a pretty, similar play style between Ugo Gonzalez and Baylor Shyman. Yes, Scheierman is more of a takes threes and point guard type player, where Ugo Gonzalez plays more in the paint and as a 3 or a 4. But I love the way they hustle, both of them. I love the way their effort and energy is there at all times. And we're just looking for someone right now that can knock down some shots and, play consistently on the offensive end. Because, it's so hard for Joe Mazzulla right now to pick between whether he should go offensive players that can't play defense or defensive players that can't really play offense. And we saw that in that 76ers game where he chose to go with more of a defensive lineup to close the game out, and the 76ers almost came back, and it, some pretty sloppy turnovers and, couple of possessions to end that fourth quarter that, might not have happened had they put in a better offensive lineup who, could handle the ball better, but then the 76ers might have scored, right? So at least they didn't let the 76ers score, but they also couldn't close that game out. Right, Josh Minot missed a couple free throws in that game that would have sealed the deal as well. But with a guy like a Baylor Scheierman, he, I think, can be one of those guys that can play both sides. If he can just get a little confidence and knock down a couple threes, which he did tonight. He scored 17 points in just 22 minutes. I think by far his best outing of the season, and one of his best outings in his career. He had a couple fantastic performances last year, late in the season. But we're just looking for him to build off of that, and he did that tonight. Right, 6 of 7 from the field, 4 or 5 from 3. He found his rhythm after, some, I would say, sporadic short stints from him earlier in the year where he'd just play a couple minutes, he'd miss a couple shots, he'd make a mistake on, either the offense or defensive end, and Joe Mazzulla would sub him right out, and we wouldn't see him for a while. But his ability in this game to, make the right plays when needed and not make crucial mistakes, obviously, this is very different than how the game went because, they got blown out. But specifically, Scheierman didn't make any, huge mistakes that led to, easy points one after another, right? It's okay if you make one or two, but it's that, not learning from those mistakes that Joe Mazzulla has been really upset at lately with his players. And Scheierman's ability to stay on the court and therefore get into a rhythm, really helped him in this game. He showed that elite shooting stroke that we saw that made him, a top college player at Creighton 2 seasons ago. And then it's just the decision making from him, right? It's not just about shooting. It's, can he make quick passes? Can he, get into a position where he can, help the offense, whether that's with a offensive rebound or setting a screen or even, making a cut that can draw a defender away from another player, and that opens up a shot, right? Just the off-ball stuff that we're looking for him to get better at, not solely the shooting, right? And then obviously, with the shooting, just not forcing shots, right? Can you make good shots that are open shots, and can you get yourself open and not just force contested threes after another? That's the offensive side of the ball. Defensive side of the ball, I would say, him dividing up the floor, sort of, finding, a position where he can, guard his player, also see the ball, and not get backdoor cut and fall asleep on some possessions that we have seen from other Celtics players. So that's been huge for him. We've also seen the diving on the floor, taking charges, the contesting shots, all the effort plays that don't show up in the box scores. And, they don't always lead to great things. But if you can combine that effort with then the actual execution, that makes a very fantastic role player. What else about him? His mentality, his growth, his maturity, he acknowledged pregame that it's difficult to find a rhythm in the limited minutes he's been getting. But he emphasized just staying ready, when his opportunity comes, taking the most of it. He said that it's whether he's making shots or diving on the ground or taking a charge, I just want to make the winning plays. And you love to see that from a young player who's trying to find his role in this league. So he shows, just his role player mindset that, other players on this team, haven't shown. And there are definitely others, right? I talked about at the top of the show, Ugo Gonzalez is very similar to Scheierman in this way that they're both, ready to learn, ready to, grow as a role player and as a primary scorer and defensive player. So both of those, I think, both these players should be getting more minutes as the season goes on, especially if this season, goes south in terms of the actual winning. I would love to see these two guys get more minutes because I think these two players are one of your top guys off the bench next season. What else? I'd like to see Scheierman start a couple games here and there, mix it up with him and Ugo Gonzalez, because, I don't see the point in sticking with, if they're winning, sure. But if you're not winning or you're staying around 500 and it's not really mattering who's starting out there, I'd love to see Scheierman and Gonzalez, mix up, alternate each game who's starting because, I think that's valuable minutes going against better defenders and better, overall NBA players that I think it's valuable for their growth. But yeah, we'll wrap it up here. We are going to be live tonight with another podcast episode. I have 5 stats that are really defining the season for the Celtics so far, and they're not specifically that those stats define this season, but it's the style at which these stats arrive from that is defining the season for the Celtics. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about Josh Minott because I think Josh Minott also can be a huge piece on this team. And then obviously tomorrow night we will be live after the Celtics take on the Jazz. A get-right game in a sense that the Celtics need to take advantage of these bad teams. But the Celtics did get their first win on Friday in the NBA Cup, so that's nice thing that the Celtics can try and push for this year, especially when they might not be an NBA playoff contender. If they can get little moments in the season that feels like a competitive atmosphere, that is vital for some of these players. But we'll wrap it up here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, go Celtics.